And so in this case, we know from strong theory and ancient theory over centuries, we know that an increase in the amount of money in circulation is going to lead to higher prices. And, this is very intuitive. And what we're seeing now is, a lot of people have been warning about higher inflation for, really ever since the 70s. There's been this sort of industry, frankly, of Chicken Littles. People, I think they've lost credibility in many ways by, calling for hyperinflation and predicting hyperinflation essentially constantly. But finally, for the first time in a little bit over a decade anyway, we're starting to see some actual real inflation in there, some significant inflation. Now, if you dig into it, then you can sort of explain each one with noise, with very specific factors. And what those generally relate to is the COVID pandemic, right? So there were a bunch of industries where they were temporarily super cheap because nobody was going to hotels or restaurants or taking planes. So those were temporarily cheap. Now that things are getting back to normal, you get a jump in price, but that's really just a jump back to normalcy, right? So that accounts for some of the inflation. And then another chunk of the inflation is coming from supply chain disruptions. So there are various industries where generally because of COVID, there is an imbalance in the supply and demand. So either they might have had to close factories, or they might have had some like COVID safety requirements or whatever. So there are some industries where they're producing less because of COVID restrictions. And then there are other industries where they just had a huge jump in demand. So for example, during the pandemic, a lot of people wanted to redo their decks, or they wanted to renovate their house. And so you had these temporary jumps in people wanting to buy doors, so if you put those two together, where you have an industry that was forced to close down production or to contract early in the pandemic, and then meanwhile they get this jump in demand, then you can get kind of these funny dislocations where that sort of a situation is resolved by, in a free market, is resolved by rising prices. So at this point, the question is understanding which of those sort of noise factors are permanent, and which of them are, we can put stories on stuff, but fundamentally, is there some underlying trend where, sure, we stumbled on the stairs, but it's because we're getting older. So in other words, all of these idiosyncratic factors that are obviously pandemic related, well, okay, but is are they reflecting a wider trend of more money running around the economy?